I'm 36 and the oldest of three siblings. My brother, Percy, is 34, and my youngest sibling, Molly, is 28. Growing up, Percy and I had a fairly typical upbringing, but Molly? She's been treated like royalty for as long as I can remember. My parents often joked she was their little miracle baby, a surprise arrival long after they thought they were done having kids. But their indulgence went beyond the normal doting. Molly was pampered to the point of being insufferable. Our dad had some sense and tried to set boundaries, but our mom? She practically rolled out the red carpet for Molly at every opportunity. Anything Molly wanted, Molly got. She was allowed to say and do things Percy and I wouldn't have dreamed of getting away with. It was maddening, but we learned to grin and bear it most of the time. By the time Molly hit her teens, though, things got worse. She developed a razor-sharp tongue and wielded it like a weapon. She'd say things like, "Percy, you'll be a burden to this family forever with that useless literature degree." Or she'd turn to me, a smug grin plastered on her face, and remark, "Do you think those under-eye bags come free with the job, or do you pay extra for them?" All the while, our mother would laugh and say, "Oh, Molly's just joking. Don't be so sensitive." But Molly wasn't joking. She meant every word, and the smirk on her face proved it. When my dad passed away 8 years ago, things really fell apart. Dad had been the glue holding our fractured family together, and without him, Percy and I stopped making the effort to visit as much. Frankly, we were better off. Molly and Mom didn't try to stay in touch, and neither did we. Percy and I formed our own little team, separate from the chaos. Mom and Molly were on their own side, and I liked it that way. But recently, that fragile piece shattered. It started when Percy fractured his ankle. His insurance covered his hospital bills, but the extras, physical therapy, medication, and hiring a nurse to help him out while he recovered, weren't included. Percy was between jobs, working on launching his online magazine after quitting his teaching gig, so he didn't have much savings to fall back on. I didn't hesitate to step in. I'm the CFO of a thriving company, so money isn't an issue for me. Percy protested, of course. That's just who he is. But I wouldn't hear it. "You're my brother," I told him. "Let me help." When Mom and Molly found out about this, they acted as though I'd declared myself their personal ATM. Molly, in particular, wasted no time. 3 days ago, as I was knee-deep in spreadsheets, my phone buzzed. It was Molly. "Hey, sis." Her voice was syrupy sweet, which immediately put me on edge. Molly only turned on the charm when she wanted something. "What's up, Molly?" I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "So, I found this amazing penthouse," she gushed. "It's perfect. Gorgeous views, modern amenities, and, well, you know how embarrassing it is for me to still be living with Mom at 28. People talk. It's time for me to have my own place." "That sounds great," I said cautiously, already sensing where this was going. "Right," she continued, undeterred. "The thing is, I've saved up for half the cost, but penthouses are, you know, insanely expensive. I was thinking you could help me cover the rest. You're always so generous, like with Percy. I figured it wouldn't be a big deal for you." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. Molly, helping Percy with his medical bills was entirely different. He needed that help. A penthouse isn't exactly a necessity. Her tone shifted instantly, the sweetness evaporating. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. You're loaded. It's not like you'll even feel it." "That's not the point," I said firmly. "I'm not funding your luxury apartment. If you want to move out, find a place within your budget." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, she exploded. "Unbelievable. You're so selfish. You'll throw money at Percy but can't spare a dime for your own sister? Do you even care about this family?" "Molly, this conversation is over," I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight. I stared at my phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. But, of course, Molly didn't stop there. The next day, Mom called. "How could you do this to your sister?" she demanded. "You know how hard it's been for her." "Hard?" I laughed bitterly. "Mom, she's 28 years old. If she wants a penthouse, she can work for it like the rest of us." "She's your sister," Mom said, as if that explained everything. "And Percy's my brother," I shot back. "He needed help. Molly doesn't need a penthouse. She wants one. There's a difference." Mom sighed heavily, the kind of sigh designed to make me feel guilty. "I thought we raised you to value family, but maybe I was wrong." "You raised me to tolerate Molly's nonsense," I said coldly. "I'm done playing that game." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, exhausted. I'd always known my relationship with Mom and Molly was fractured, but this was new territory. Part of me felt a pang of guilt. But the other part, the part that remembered all the years of Molly's insults and manipulations, felt nothing but relief. For the first time in years, I'd said no. And it felt damn good. The call came mid-afternoon, interrupting a rare moment of peace. I stared at Molly's name on the screen, my stomach sinking. For 8 years, we'd exchanged little more than strained smiles and awkward pleasantries, our encounters more obligation than connection. And now, out of the blue, she wanted something. "A favor," she said, her voice as bright and breezy as if we'd been best friends forever. I pinched the bridge of my nose, already bracing myself. Of course Molly wasn't calling just to chat. She never did. "What kind of favor?" I asked, though I was certain I wouldn't like the answer. "I need help with the deposit for my new apartment," she said, her tone almost flippant, as if she were asking me to grab her a coffee. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. I had to remind myself to breathe. Molly, the sibling who couldn't be bothered to show up to family events unless coerced by our mother. Molly, who barely acknowledged me unless she needed something. Molly, who was now expecting me to bankroll her lifestyle. I leaned back in my chair, letting the ridiculousness of it wash over me. "You're joking, right?" I said finally, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. "No," she replied, a little too quickly. "Why would I joke about something like this?" I rubbed my temple, feeling a headache coming on. "Molly, you're 28 years old. You can get a job like the rest of us and pay for your own apartment." Her indignant scoff practically crackled through the phone. "I have a job. I'm a freelance graphic designer, remember?" "Oh, right," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the job where Mom has to guilt-trip family friends into giving you work? The one where you've yet to finish a single project anyone actually uses? That job?" Her silence was deafening. I could picture her on the other end of the line, her face flushing with anger, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a comeback. "Well, at least I'm trying," she snapped eventually. "You think it's easy being the youngest and always living in your shadows? Everyone helps you and Percy out, but when it's my turn, suddenly I'm on my own?" My patience, already hanging by a thread, snapped. Percy didn't ask for help to live out some fantasy. He needed help while he was between jobs. And you know what? He's always made an effort to have a relationship with me. You can't even be bothered to fake civility most of the time." I didn't wait for her response. "No, Molly. I'm not paying for your apartment," I said firmly before hanging up. The phone rang again almost immediately, her name flashing on the screen. I muted it and tossed the phone onto the couch. For the rest of the day, I ignored her calls, steeling myself for what I knew was coming next. Sure enough, when I walked through the door that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mom. I took a deep breath before answering, already picturing the storm I was about to weather. "Hi, Mom." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "How could you do this to Molly?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. "She's been looking for an apartment for months, and now that she's finally found one, you won't help her?" Mom, I don't owe her anything, I said as calmly as I could manage. She's your sister. Mom shot back, her tone rising. She's family. And as the oldest, it's your responsibility to look out for her. I let out a bitter laugh. Family? Mom, Molly hasn't treated me like family in years. And you know what? I'm tired of this double standard where Percy and I are expected to fend for ourselves, but Molly gets to coast by on everyone else's efforts. Mom's voice dropped, her words laced with venom. We raised you better than this. Your father and I worked so hard to give you the opportunities you have now. And this is how you repay us? By turning your back on your own sister? I could feel my pulse quicken, anger bubbling to the surface. Don't you dare bring Dad into this, I said, my voice trembling. He's the reason Percy and I managed to stay sane in this family. And let's not pretend you've been a beacon of fairness either. Molly's always been your favorite, and we've known it for years. That's not true, she snapped. Isn't it? I countered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Or asked Percy about his life without turning it into a conversation about Molly? You don't even see us, Mom. We're just background characters in the Molly show. The line went silent for a moment, and I almost thought she'd hung up. Then, in a voice trembling with rage, she said, if that's how you feel, then maybe we're better off going no contact. Her words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. I let out a dry chuckle. Go ahead, I said. Honestly, it might be a relief at this point. Her gasp was audible. You don't mean that. Oh, I do, I said, the weight of years of resentment lifting as I spoke. You've already made your choice, Mom. You chose Molly the long time ago. So go ahead and cut me out, but don't expect me to feel guilty about it. Her voice rose again, a flurry of accusations and threats, but I didn't stick around to hear them. Goodbye, Mom, I said, cutting her off and hanging up. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. The ties that had bound me to this toxic cycle were finally severed, and though the future felt uncertain, it also felt free. For a moment, I thought about deleting the text before sending it. The words felt too raw, too final. Maybe I could make space for someone else who's more deserving. I hesitated, staring at the screen. But then, with a decisive flick of my thumb, I pressed send. I didn't wait for a response. Before my mother could call me or Molly could swoop in with her unsolicited opinions, I blocked them both. My hands trembled, but I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, a quiet kind of defiance. Molly had been wrong. Dead wrong. Career-driven, ambitious women do find love. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found Jackson. We wouldn't have built 5 solid years together, or be planning a wedding in a few months. My mother and Molly had met him a few times, though always through tightly controlled encounters. They'd been polite, even friendly, but Jackson had sensed the tension. They're complicated, I told him, understating the years of neglect, favoritism, and simmering resentment. When Jackson and I decided to host a small, private engagement party, I wrestled with the question of inviting them. At first, I convinced myself to extend an olive branch. But in the days leading up to the event, the thought of their presence filled me with dread. Why invite people who had only ever chipped away at my confidence? I decided against it. It felt satisfying, like finally cutting a fraying thread. Yesterday, Jackson received a message from my mother on social media. Your fiancé blocked me, she wrote. And Molly too. I just wanted her to know I'm deeply disappointed. Since she's made it clear where we stand, Molly and I have decided to cut her off permanently. I hope she's happy, finally ending what little family connection we had. Jackson read the message aloud, his brow furrowed. When he looked up at me, I saw the same worry he'd worn every time I brought up my family. Do you want to talk about it? He asked gently. I shook my head, my chest tightening. Why do they act like I'm the villain here? The words spilled out, bitter and raw. They've never cared about me. And now they want me to feel guilty for choosing peace over this? Jackson hesitated, his loyalty to me battling his natural empathy. They seemed hurt, he admitted. Maybe he didn't finish, but I knew where his thoughts were headed. That night, I called my brother Percy. They're manipulating you, he said bluntly. They always have. Why should you feel guilty? They've never apologized for anything. Percy had always been my rock, the one person who truly understood what growing up in our family had been like. When I explained Jackson's perspective, Percy didn't mince words. Tell him the truth. All of it. He's not going to judge you. The next morning, I sat Jackson down and shared everything, the years of favoritism, the subtle but persistent put-downs, the way my mother's world revolved around Molly while Percy and I were left to fend for ourselves. When I finished, Jackson's face was unreadable. If my parents had treated me or my siblings like that, he said finally, his voice low and steady, I would have cut them off without a second thought. For the first time in days, I felt lighter. It's been a week since we blocked my mother and Molly. Percy and I felt a strange sense of relief, like we were finally stepping out of the shadow of a lifelong storm. Then this morning, we got a call from our uncle. Your mother's decided to transfer half her shares to Molly, he said without preamble. And she's demanding voting power for her. I almost dropped the phone. What? Why? She's insisting Molly deserves it. But Molly has no business experience. If she gets those shares and voting power, it'll be chaos. He sounded desperate, his usually calm voice fraying at the edges. Can you talk to her? Please? Percy and I debated it for hours. Our uncle had always been good to us, stepping in after our father died, but the idea of facing our mother again felt unbearable. Still, we owed him. So that evening, we found ourselves at her door. Molly answered, her smirk instantly setting my nerves on edge. What do you want? She asked, crossing her arms. Ignoring her, Percy and I walked past her into the living room. Our mother was seated, flipping through a magazine like she didn't have a care in the world. When she finally looked up, her expression hardened. You have some nerve showing up here. We need to talk about the shares, I said, keeping my voice steady. Her lips curled into a cold smile. Oh, now you care about the family business? Molly sauntered in, leaning casually against the doorframe. You mean the business you've ignored for years? Funny how you only show interest when it's about me. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Percy put a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. This isn't about jealousy, he said evenly. It's about what's best for the company. Molly doesn't have the experience. Our mother's eyes flashed with anger. After the way you've treated me, you think you have the right to tell me what to do? Molly laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Face it. You're here because you're scared I might actually succeed. I snapped. Succeed? Molly, you've coasted on favoritism your whole life. You wouldn't last a week running that company. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. For a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. But then our mother stood, her face pale with fury. Get out, she hissed. Both of you. Now. Percy and I exchanged a glance. We'd done what we could. As we left, I felt a pang of regret, but also a strange sense of closure. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to move forward. I tried to reason with my mother, my voice trembling as I stood in the living room, which was now filled with a suffocating tension. The dim light from the chandelier above seemed to cast long, shadowy fingers across the walls, and I could feel Molly's eyes burning into me, daring me to fail. Mom, I began, my tone imploring, Dad wouldn't have wanted this. You know that. He said it himself so many times, he didn't want us involved in the company, and he trusted Uncle to handle things. If you push this, you're going against his wishes. Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But before I could press further, Molly's voice sliced through the air like a whip. Oh, stop pretending you're the noble one here, she snapped, stepping forward with a sneer that could curdle milk. You've already made it clear you want nothing to do with this family. Why don't you just leave? Or are you waiting for us to call the cops? My jaw clenched, but before I could respond, Percy intervened. Molly, back off, he said sharply, his voice low and steady, though I could see the storm brewing behind his calm exterior. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the pounding in my chest, and turned back to my mother. Please, Mom, I pleaded. Dad built that company from nothing. He poured his blood, sweat, and tears into it, and the only person he ever trusted to carry it forward was Uncle. He didn't want this circus of infighting. He didn't want us tearing each other apart over something he'd already made so clear. Molly scoffed loudly, throwing her hands in the air. Oh, give me a break. You're just jealous, aren't you? Jealous that I might actually have a shot at being happy for once. God forbid someone else gets something you don't. I turned to face her, my voice cold but steady. Jealous? Of you? Molly, you wouldn't know what to do with that company if it came with an instruction manual and a full-time mentor. This isn't about happiness, it's about respect. Respect for Dad and everything he stood for. The room fell silent for a moment, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. My mother's face was unreadable, her eyes flickering between me, Molly, and Percy. Finally, she raised her hand. Enough, she shouted, her voice ringing out like a judge's gavel. I've heard enough. You, all of you, have done nothing but disrespect me today. Leave. Now. I felt my stomach drop. Mom, please. Leave, she repeated, her tone icy and final. I'll think about what you've said and speak to your uncle. But for now, I need all of you out of my house. Percy put a hand on my shoulder, a silent signal that it was time to go. As we walked out the door, Molly stayed behind, her smirk of triumph a dagger in my heart. 2 weeks later, we finally got word from Uncle. My mother, after much deliberation, had decided that Molly would not get a say in how the company was run. I let out a shaky breath of relief when Percy called me with the news. At least she's not getting voting rights, I said, my voice still tinged with disbelief. Preferred shares, though? Well, I suppose that's better than the alternative. Percy laughed dryly on the other end. Mom's just trying to throw her a bone while keeping Uncle from pulling his hair out. Classic compromise. I'll take it, I said, leaning back in my chair. I just hope this means Dad's company won't go under because of her. We hadn't spoken to our mothers since that night. And honestly, it felt like a weight had been lifted. There was no more drama, no more toxicity. Just peace. For the first time in years, Percy and I were free to focus on our own lives. Months passed, and life took on a new rhythm. I was preparing for my wedding, the happiest time of my life, when I heard through the family grapevine that my mother and Molly had found out they weren't invited. The fallout was immediate. They're trying to sabotage the guest list, my cousin Rebecca told me over the phone. Calling people, telling them not to attend. It's kind of pathetic, honestly. I laughed, the sound more amused than bitter. Let them try. Anyone who'd skip my wedding because of them wasn't worth inviting in the first place. Rebecca sighed. True. But still, it's exhausting just hearing about it. Welcome to my world, I said dryly. The day of the wedding arrived, and it was perfect. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the venue buzzed with the laughter and chatter of friends and family, the ones who mattered. Percy gave a toast that had everyone in stitches, and as I danced with the love of my life, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Somewhere across town, Molly was probably sulking in the penthouse apartment my mother had rented. She'd likely spun a story about how she was a martyr, staying with her mother out of pure devotion. They'd make excellent soap opera writers, Percy quipped when I mentioned it later. Too bad melodrama doesn't pay the bills. We both laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it felt genuine and free of the weight of the past. My life was finally mine. And as Percy's magazine continued to flourish and my career reached new heights, I knew one thing for certain. Molly was wrong about everything. And the joke was on her.